Waldner, could you tell me how you started the Japan-American Society?
Well, I got to Atlanta in 1973, having completed 2 years in Japan doing my research as a PhD student at Princeton. And my topic was U.S.-Japanese economic and political relations. Particularly, my dissertation topic focused on economic frictions in U.S.-Japan relations. And if you recall, in the 1950s and 1960s, the big issues in the U.S.-Japan relationship had to do with military and security issues, particularly the AMPO controversy of the late 50s and 1960s. And my dissertation argument was that in the 1970s and 80s, and for the foreseeable future, that the main problems between the United States and Japan were going to be more in the area of economics, more so than political and military issues. That was the overall thesis, and particularly as the war in Vietnam was winding down and the competitiveness of Japanese products was becoming very strong, displacing first textile industry jobs and then other jobs. It seemed to me that this was going to heat up as an issue in the relationship. And so when I got to Atlanta, I was pleased to find out that there was a rapidly growing relationship between Japan and Atlanta, with the consulate moving from New Orleans to Atlanta, that reflected the judgment on the part of leaders in Japan that Atlanta was the place to be if you wanted to do business in the southeastern United States rather than New Orleans. And so things began to pick up very rapidly, lots of Japanese companies popping up around 285, distribution, but then also the banks coming in, things like that. And so in the mid-1970s, I began making the rounds to leaders with interests in international affairs, saying, you know, with a lot of Japanese companies coming in and with more and more Japanese families locating in the Atlanta area, it really isn't wise to assume that everything's just going to go fine, that there won't be any problems or any potential problems. And maybe not to put it in a negative sense, but you know, what's going to ensure that the Japanese people living here for 2 or 3 or 4 years feel that they've been welcomed and had a positive experience? Because if you want to promote Atlanta as a focus for international investment, what you really want is for Japanese families to go back to Japan and say, you know, we had a wonderful time in Georgia. And so Mrs. Yamada will say to Mrs. Mori, you don't need to be fearful about going to Atlanta for a 2 or 3 year period. It's a wonderful place to be. We had a wonderful time. And so the idea is to kind of have them leave laughing, or at least leave smiling, that they had a great time in Atlanta, the business opportunities were there, the family had a good time, and that it's a great place to be in the United States. But my point was that you can't just take that for granted that that's going to happen, that there has to be some systematic effort to bring together leaders from the Atlanta and Georgia communities on the one side, and leaders from the Japanese business community and government. The consulate, of course, is a tremendous resource, to take steps to bring people together in positive interactions. And of course, culture is a tremendous way to do that, and there's so much to share. The American South, and particularly Georgia, is a particularly rich vein for cultural sharing. The history, the cuisine, the distinctive culture of the South. There's a lot there that would be of interest to the Japanese. I think evidence of that, of course, is the popularity of Gone with the Wind in Japan. It's always been a kind of allure, something sort of archaic, somewhat haunting, perhaps a little bit tragic historically about the South that has appealed to the Japanese mentality. And so there's a lot there. Of course, on the Japanese side, there's all kinds of stuff. Flower arranging, tea ceremony, dress, design, martial arts, you name it. There's so much to share. And that if you bring people together on these cultural topics, and particularly that would involve the ladies and families, and the business leaders too, in those days mainly men, but then also have an economics and politics program, have a luncheon speaker on some issue in U.S.-Japan relations, or some heavier political or economic topic. And so the Japan-America Society is designed to deal with the tough issues, the political and economic issues, the substantive issues of the relationship, but then also build friendship and build bridges through cultural sharing. And there's so much to share that I felt it would be a good idea to have an organization like that. And as a longtime member of the Japan Society in New York, essentially what I was arguing was, why don't we have something like the Japan Society in Atlanta? And have that be a vehicle to promote the economic development of the community as an international city, focusing on the Japanese role.
I knew it was going to happen.
That's fine.
Oh, you can go through, sir. Thank you. Sorry.
Sorry.
Oh, no, can't hear. Dr. Waldner, will you go back to the part where you were talking about actually getting it formed and start from there?
Getting the what?
Getting the society formed.
Formed? Well, it wasn't too dramatic. I mean, basically, I would call up the head of a bank, the head of a manufacturing company. I went to see the consul general, of course, and say what I just said to you, that, we got to start a Japan-America Society here in Atlanta. And, the usual reaction to that is, oh my God, one more 501c3, one more nonprofit organization which is going to need money and an office and, so forth and so on. We've got this, we've got that, why don't you go someplace else? And so that was the reaction that I got over a period of years. But finally, when I went to see Ian Wilson of the Coca-Cola Company, Mr. Wilson immediately saw the validity of the concept and became a supporter of it. And Coca-Cola, for anyone who's been around Atlanta, is a leader in the community, in the business community. And Mr. Wilson at that time was the head of all East Asian operations for the Coca-Cola Company, and was one of 2 or 3 people actively being considered for the presidency of the company. And so if you're an Atlanta business person and you get a letter from Ian Wilson saying that he thinks it would be a good idea if we had a Japan-America Society in Georgia, and I'm hosting a luncheon to discuss that topic, won't you come? The answer to that letter is, yes, I'd love to come. I'll be happy to be there. And so it was really getting the horsepower of the Coca-Cola Company behind the concept, which gave it some traction in the American business community. And then the Japanese consul general, who at that time was Mr. Chiba, the first consul general here in Atlanta, was very enthusiastic about it as well. And there's a monthly meeting, there was a monthly meeting called the Konwa Kai of Japanese business leaders with the consul general's staff. And I never attended those meetings, but I understand that the consul general said to the Japanese business leaders, there's a movement to start a Japan-America Society here in Atlanta. I think it would be a good idea if you were to support that. And sure enough, a lot of the Japanese business people thought it was a good idea. So in effect, by having not George Waldner, a professor of international relations at Oglethorpe University, pushing the idea, but by having very credible and high-powered individuals in both the American and Japanese community saying, this is a good idea, that's how the thing started moving.